Okay.
First, a few housekeeping items before we begin. All participants have been muted with the exception of our presenters. You can ask questions at any point during today's presentation using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom webinar window. The speakers will leave time to answer questions at the end of today's presentation. The webinar will also be recorded. A link to the recording will be sent out to all attendees via email. Our speakers today are Andrew Gunter of Cential and Jason Rolfe with Onspring. Our first speaker, Andrew, is a partner with Cential and a risk and compliance expert. Andrew specializes in the assessment and development of enterprise risk and compliance programs. He has valuable experience with GRC technology system design, configuration, and implementation that includes a custom-built NERC solution. Andrew is also a corporate compliance and ethics subject matter specialist, having served as an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, where he taught a course on the development of corporate compliance programs. Jason will be our second speaker today. As Vice President of Solutions for Onspring, Jason Rolfe is responsible for designing and developing the Onspring Solution Suite. Leveraging 20 years of audit, compliance, GRC, software, and consulting experience, Jason helps organizations of all shapes and sizes solve business challenges, gain efficiencies, and work to their full potential. Thank you all for joining us today. I will now hand things over to Andrew to get us started.
Thank you, Megan. And hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. As mentioned, my name is Andrew Gunter, and I'm a partner with Cential. We are a boutique consulting firm that specializes in the development of GRC roadmaps, building risk and compliance programs, implementing GRC technology solutions like Onspring, leading IT audits, and thanks to our background of implementing GRC solutions at power and utility companies, have developed a NERC compliance solution that we'll be demoing later today. But first, I'll be discussing what is a risk-based approach to NERC compliance, provide an overview of NERC's recent trends with regards to risk-based compliance, and what we mean when we say seeking NERC Nirvana. So what is a risk-based compliance approach? When we say risk-based compliance, we mean approach to NERC. It is focusing your company's attention and resources on the standards and requirements that have the highest level of risk or impact to reliability. This approach to compliance in general is common across industries and compliance areas. From a compliance profession perspective, we see regulators and best practices for compliance continue to push towards this approach. For example, under the federal sentencing guidelines, prosecutors, when evaluating penalties for a criminal violation by an organization, are encouraged to review the quality and effectiveness of a risk-based compliance program that devotes appropriate attention and resources to the highest risk transactions, even if it fails to prevent an infraction in a low-risk area. This is also known as risk tailoring. The question really is, are you dedicating your resources and oversight to the highest risk areas for your organization? NERC formalized their risk-based approach to compliance in 2015 with a multi-year effort called the Reasonable Assurance Initiative, or RAI. The idea being a right-sized approach to monitoring enforcement that encourages proper allocation of resources and an effective internal control program would benefit the entire grid through focus on higher reliability. Now, the following slide may be familiar to many of you on the webcast, as the graphic was provided by NERC as an explanation of their RAI program as it applies to registered entities. Starting on the left, we have risk elements, or it could be considered industry and regional risks. These risks are identified and prioritized by NERC as nationwide reliability risks based on significance, likelihood, vulnerability, and potential impact to the reliability of the bulk power system. These risks are then mapped to NERC standards and requirements and create the highest level potential scope of a company's compliance oversight plan found in the far right. These risks also inform the next step in the process, known as Inherent Risk Assessment, or IRA, which I oftentimes consider a utility-specific risks. The IRA is a review by a regional entity of potential risk posed by an individual entity to the reliability of the bulk power system. Risk factors that are considered in the IRA are assets, systems, geography, interconnectivity, prior compliance history, and factors unique to the entity. At this point, companies have a decision to make. They can participate in NERC's Internal Control Evaluation Program, or ICE program, or stay the course with the standard compliance monitoring approaches. ICE is a voluntary evaluation by a regional entity of a company's internal controls that detect, correct, and mitigate the company's specific risk identified in the inherent risk assessment performed by their regional entity. Additionally, through ICE, a company may further refine the scope of the audit by a regional entity, including the depth and breadth of a particular area of review, or determine whether an audit is even necessary. The simple value proposition for companies that participate in ICE is if it is required resource expenditure for the internal control assessments will be offset by a reduction in compliance monitoring. However, it's important to note that there is no upfront guarantee of reduced compliance monitoring prior to the understanding and evaluating of internal controls, and if the determination is that they are ineffective, then the benefit of a reduction in monitoring scope has thus been defeated. Organizations participating in ICE, therefore, are encouraged to thoroughly document their risks, processes, and controls and continue to evaluate them on their own. The last section on the slide is the CMEP tools and the Entity Compliance Oversight Plan, or it can be considered a tailored oversight plan under CMEP. A regional entity will determine the type and frequency of application of the compliance monitoring tools. For example, it could include off-site or on-site audits, spot checks, self-certifications, all of which may be appropriate for a particular registered entity based on its specific reliability risks as evaluated through inherent risk assessment. If ICE is used, the regional entity may rely on those internal controls, and therefore extensive testing may not be necessary under the other CMEP tools. In order to properly understand the risk-based approach, however, to compliance, it is valuable to know the history of the program and recent trends in the program. In 2006, NERC was certified as the Electric Reliability Organization, or ERO, by FERC to facilitate the ongoing monitoring of users, owners, and operator compliance with reliability standards. This is pretty much NERC 101 for most everyone on the call, but the story of NERC's transition to a risk-based approach to compliance monitoring starts here as NERC commenced its enforcement efforts. In 2012, NERC took its first step towards a risk-based approach by introducing the Find, Fix, Track, and Report program to allow NERC to address lesser risk-mediated possible violations of reliability standards. Then in 2013, NERC introduced the Reasonable Assurance Initiative, or RAI, which was ultimately approved by FERC in 2015, with the goal of registered entities focusing on higher risk issues that matter most to reliability. For the most part, RAI has been received favorably by the industry as it doesn't remove the requirement to be compliant with NERC standards and have documented compliance narratives, but encourages registered entities to focus their resources on the highest risk concerns. Through 2015 to 2018, RAI rollout started gaining traction amongst regional entities and registered entities. During this time, some registered entities or utility companies began adopting a risk and control framework and participating in NERC's internal control evaluation program. There has been several instances, however, of NERC requiring utilities to actually build a risk control framework as part of their penalty for NERC violation. In one recent case of a major East Coast power utility that resulted in major fines, it included the requirement to have a risk control framework be implemented. In this decision, NERC highlighted the following elements that we will continue to discuss throughout today's presentation: lack of management engagement, support, and accountability, ineffective oversight and training, lack of implementation, and organizational silos. These are all key elements when we consider NERC Nirvana. During this period of 2015 to 2018, however, the risk and control-based approach to compliance was still new for NERC and the regional entities, which resulted in a slow evolution of expectations around the program. Now in 2019, we are noticing a shift by NERC signaling growth and maturity and a signal to the industry that risk identification and the document of control should also continue to mature. For example, on this slide, we see a side-by-side comparison of risk elements from 2016 to 2018 and the risk elements of 2019. From 2016 to 2018, we see high-level risk categories: critical infrastructure protection, extreme physical events, maintenance and management of BPS assets, events response recoveries, and so on and so forth. While meaningful, and if we review NERC's ERO Compliance Monitoring Enforcement Program Implementation Plan that they publish, we are provided with additional details. The categories are still high level and don't clearly define the concerned issues, and therefore it can be difficult to document controls that address the specific concerns. Compare this to the 2019 risk elements, and we are starting to see a maturation of NERC's program, where they are providing risks that focus on more discrete issues. For example, with regards to the critical infrastructure protection found in 2016 to 2018, in 2019, we replace it with what I would consider more actionable risk, the improper management of employee and insider access. Now, with this risk, we can identify processes that manage employee access and identify specific controls to prevent or detect potential compliance issues. As we continue down this list, we continue to see detailed risk replacing the broad risk categories of the past. Things like spare equipment with extended lead time, improper determinant of missed operations, inability to rise through events, and so on and so forth. So when we say NERC Nirvana, what do we mean? It really is just an approach to NERC compliance that reduces your organization's risk and enhances your program's oversight by essentially managing your program, removing silos, and standardizing processes. In the provided picture, we put NERC Standards at the center of the program, and from those NERC Standards, we can track all related activity: inherent risk assessments, annual Rsaws or your compliance narratives, internal control programs, issues management, and incidents management. You may notice that I have highlighted a few key terms on the right as critical components of NERC Nirvana: oversight, removing silos, and standardizing processes. All three elements are needed for an effective program and were also mentioned in the case that we discussed earlier in today's webcast. From a risk-based approach to NERC compliance, organizations can perform inherent risk assessments of their own to identify the highest risk standards and requirements, and then based on the risk level identified, modify their approach to gain reasonable assurance that the standards and requirements are being met. For example, in the attached heat map, EOP 004-4, or event reporting, which is listed as number 6 on the slide, has a lower impact and likelihood on this chart found in the left-hand corner, and therefore may only require the annual drafting compliance narratives and providing evidence to prove compliance with the requirements. While if we move up into the right on the chart, we identify our highest risk NERC standards where we should be focusing our greatest attention. For example, SIP 007-6, System Security Management, or number 9 in this chart, would require greater levels of assurance, which would suggest taking a control-based approach to compliance as the best approach. Depending upon the resources and capabilities of your organization, you may or may not decide to build out controls to the mid-tier risk standards, items highlighted in yellow, but that will depend upon each organization's risk appetite. Please note that the standards that have been listed on this slide and their ranking on the impact and likelihood is merely meant to be as an example and is not necessarily reflective of your organization's actual risk profile. If we look at common types of assurance methods, we can evaluate what method is going to be the best for any given standard. On the left, we have annual compliance narratives, which is the standard practice of documenting compliance through a compliance narrative and providing evidence of compliance. Oftentimes, we see organizations completing an annual Rsaw or performing a mock Rsaw to accomplish this goal. To the right in blue, we have control attestations, where controls are documented and requirement owners or control owners attest that the control is in place and is effective. And then finally, in yellow, we get to the highest level of assurance with control operating tests, where we're actually performing tests on the identified controls to ensure compliance. Even within this category, there can be varying levels of assurance, from performing tests that are simply inquiries and moving up to higher levels of assurance through observations, inspections, or reperformance of the control. We could perform a whole nother webinar just around different types of control testing and their level of assurance, but the purpose of today is to at least give you the baseline of how various control tests could provide you different levels of assurance based upon risk. Applying these concepts of risk level and reasonable assurance together provides a look at something like what you see on the screen now, where a risk assessment of low for a standard like EOP 004-4 only requires the compliance narrative to be drafted on an annual basis. Moderate risk standards may do the compliance may have a compliance narrative plus some document controls that require attestations on a periodic basis, as noticed in yellow. And finally, as we get to the high-risk standards on the far right, where we have documented compliance narratives and perform compliance tests, you can see that the level of scrutiny is greatly increased, and we may have incidents where we have multiple controls tied to a single requirement. This can be common when compliance requirements across multiple business units, and the process by tying them back to a specific requirement enables us to identify if one of the control fails a test where the root cause may occur, thus breaking down silos across business units while providing management with the level of oversight that is needed for an effective compliance program. Achieving NERC Nirvana, however, is the challenge, however, with NERC Nirvana is that even with a risk-based approach that encourages right-sized monitoring, is that it can be time-consuming, challenging, and expensive to manage all the activities and centralize them into meaningful reports for management. Whether it is maintaining control libraries, executing control tests, monitoring corrective action plans, or simply trying to map these elements back to a standard and maintain that list can be difficult without a technology solution. Oftentimes, organizations that try to achieve this vision will rely on multiple spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, shared drives, or SharePoints to bring the entire program together. And even then, reports are still 100% manual, requiring analysts to piecemeal the entire program together and to constantly be updating their documentation manually. Thus, this is where a GRC solution, like the NERC solution for Onspring, comes into the picture to help address these concerns and achieve the goal of reducing your compliance risk and enhancing your NERC program oversight by essentially managing your program, removing those, and standardizing the process. Before we jump into the NERC solution, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to provide us with an overview of the Onspring solution and how the broader platform can be leveraged for an organization beyond just NERC compliance. Jason?
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Part of my role here at Onspring that I get to play really demands constant learning and constant education about what professionals are dealing with and struggling with. So I really appreciate you going through and giving us that overview of NERC. It's very informative. And of course, thank you to all of those who chose to jump on the call with us today. Appreciate you guys making the time. So in his last slide, Andrew did refer to those technical challenges with managing NERC compliance efforts and really any compliance effort. There's a lot of disparate information. There's a lot of disjointed information that could stand to be standardized and centralized and make it easier for you guys to track your compliance efforts and your reporting around that. And just a little bit later, Andrew's going to jump back on, and he's actually going to demonstrate the creative solution that Cential has built on the Onspring platform to really help you drive you towards that state of NERC Nirvana. But before we do that, let's give you guys a little bit of background on Onspring, who we are, what we do, and most importantly, why we do it. So you can see some basic information on the slide here. Who are we at Onspring? Well, we were founded in 2010 in Overland Park, Kansas. The first version of our platform was actually released in 2013, and since then, we pride ourselves on being a very innovative company, and we're constantly working with our client base, with our partners like Cential, to identify new and interesting features to feature into the platform so that people can really do their best work. And that really gets into the why of Onspring. Why was Onspring founded? Why do we do what we do? Well, our primary focus, as you can see there and under our vision, is to really help you do your best work. We want to give you a tool that performs, something that's reliable, and something that you can leverage in a wide variety of ways to solve any number of different business problems that you're facing. And how we do that is actually by offering a cloud-based no-code platform that we're going to talk. Oh, you're good, Andrew. Yep, we're going to talk about the cloud-based no-code platform, and really that's the foundation of what Onspring is. As you'll see in the next slide in just a second, we have a number of purpose-built solutions, and then certainly as we get into Andrew's demonstration, you'll see some of the creative ways that our clients and our partners take advantage of the Onspring platform. But really, we offer this flexible platform that lets you work in very different and meaningful ways. And we do that by basing everything we do, every feature we release, on 3 primary tenets that you can see here. Number 1 is flexibility. So while we like to think that we can help you solve every problem for you, we also realize that there's a lot of nuance in the way that you guys do your work. Even those of you who are trying to achieve that NERC compliance state, there may be nuances in terms of terminology or logic or different ways that you want to engage different sets of users. So flexibility is really at the heart of Onspring, letting you do great work and doing it the way that is most meaningful to you and your organization. The second tenet is very important to us, performance. We want to give you a tool that helps you, that drives you towards that goal rather than one that hinders you or gets in the way. So performance is of utmost importance to us, making sure that that tool is responsive and performs exactly the way you expect it to. And then along with that, the user experience. Presenting and providing an intuitive design, a great experience regardless of your nature or extent of your interaction with the system, whether you're a casual user of Onspring or whether you're a deep administrative user. We want to make that a great experience. And as I mentioned, by being constantly innovating, introducing new features, and really every new feature that we introduce into the platform really must align to all 3 of these tenets in order to sort of make the cut into Onspring. So what we offer right now and how we go to market, primarily what you see here is just our foundational set of GRC solutions. They focus on those primary areas of risk and compliance and audit and control and policy and all of those different areas. The nice thing about the platform is that it allows us to present these solutions and make these solutions available as a whole, very well interconnected and intertwined. Or you also have the ability to use any of these solutions as standalone solutions. So we use best practice and industry guidance as our sort of beacon to design and put out all of these solutions. But again, going back to that flexibility of the platform, we're also very mindful and very focused that you may have specific ways of addressing these problems yourselves. And to that point, outside of these GRC solutions, we also offer other use cases that go beyond basic GRC, like the solutions you see here, some of the other business operations solutions you see here, some of which may closely tie into some of the things that Andrew is going to show you in his demonstration, but business continuity and disaster recovery, really business resiliency, managing those incidents, getting your legal team involved where it needs to be, and so on. And the nice thing about Onspring, too, that we've noticed with our clients is that our clients have been very creative and very active in creating new use cases, new ways to solve business problems outside of what we've thought about, which really brings me back to Andrew and brings us back to part of the reason you guys are all on the call today. I'm really excited to see and for Andrew to show you what Cential has done with the Onspring platform, how they've approached this very kind of complex problem of achieving that NERC Nirvana state and leverage the flexibility and the capabilities of the Onspring platform to make that happen. So Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and hand that back over to you so you can show the folks what you guys have done with the platform.
Thanks, Jason. So at Cential, we have helped multiple organizations build out their NERC compliance programs by utilizing various GRC solutions, but have decided to partner with Onspring as it brought a value proposition for our customers that we could not easily reproduce on other platforms. As Jason mentioned, the flexibility of the platform to easily enable solutions and build custom processes like the compliance narrative process that we will share with you momentarily. Additionally, the user performance and the sub-second response time is top of the class in GRC platforms, which encourage adoption by end users, which is a critical component to utilizing technology to achieve NERC Nirvana. In today's demo, we are limited on time, and I cannot show you the entire solution, but if anyone would like to see all the capability at a later date, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to provide a full demo. Also, we continue to build upon this solution and look to provide additional functionality that supports the NERC program on an ongoing basis. Today, we will just start by covering the NERC dashboards that have been created for a management overview type perspective, how to perform inherent risk assessments, managing your internal control evaluations program, documenting and maintaining issues, and then ultimately to the annual Rsaws where you can do your compliance. At this time, I'm going to jump into Onspring. So everyone should be able to see on the screen now that I've opened up the Onspring platform. For those that are just want to utilize NERC platform just for NERC, we have a little container here that contains all the applications, dashboards, and resources that you need. But for those organizations that want to harness the greater Onspring platform for whether it's integrating into a GRC platform, integrated risk management, or just for specific processes, automation, all of them still exist across the top, and the NERC solution integrates with the various platforms that we'll discuss later today. To start with, I want to go over the dashboards. In particular, we start out on our NERC Oversight dashboard. This dashboard provides any leaders that go into Onspring an immediate snapshot of the NERC program and where they should be focused. You can see across the top here, we have the ability to search standards. At Cential, maintain a NERC standard environment library. And part of subscription services, we continually provide updates to that library for organizations to use. If you just want to search for any of the NERC standards, so if we want SIP 003-6, I can type it in, hit enter, and it'll pop up, and I can just navigate to that NERC standard inside Onspring. If I go back to the dashboards, I'm taken back to the main dashboard, where the main oversight dashboard. I have quick links to report an incident or add a new finding, which we'll be discussing here further momentarily. Now, when designing the dashboard, we decide what would be the highest concern for any leader when they sign into Onspring. And the first thing that came up is what we call our red flag NERC standards. These are any NERC standards that have a control that has failed an evaluation test, has an open finding, or has an open incident. And then we sorted it by level of risk. So if you're a leader, you can quickly come in and see VAR 002-4.1, which has a high risk score, should be a top concern because we have open findings and open incidents. And if I click the little drop down, I can see all of the associated requirements, who owns those requirements, the risk rating with each one of those requirements, and whether they have any open findings or open incidents or any failed control tests. So here, I would probably want to reach out to Adam to talk to him about his open findings and open incidents and focus my attention on that specific requirement. If I go to the right, I have my inherent risk assessment, where we're performing our various risk assessments on all the requirements and what the output of those were from a rating perspective. The majority of them are still falling within the minor, major, or minor, insignificant to moderate, but we have multiple majors and several catastrophics that we are concerned about. If I scroll down, we have a full list of what we call active NERC standards that are applicable to your organization. In here, it's rated by their average NERC risk score, as well as any open controls, open findings related to and the status of their annual Rsaw approach. It gives you a single snapshot regarding all the different processes that can occur inside the Onspring solution. One of the first steps that we have any organization do when they first onboard the NERC solution is to go through the NERC standards and identify whether it is applicable to their organization. This allows you to quickly narrow the scope of all the NERC standards and requirements down to just the ones that are meaningful to your organization. This one little field here will then drive all the reports, all the automation that occurs inside the NERC Onspring solution, just to the ones that are that are the highest interest of your organization. If I go to the right, we have our NERC inherent risk assessment heat map, where it's taking a look again at our risk score and determining where do they fall from a risk evaluation perspective. And I can always drill into any of them to determine what specifically was of concern for those requirements. So here I have VAR 002-4.1, R1 and R4. But if I wanted to see the unlikely and insignificant ones, I can do that. They automatically display, and I can always drill into those requirements directly. If I click into the NERC container, we can see all the different dashboards that are available to users when they log into the Onspring solution. We put them in order of a natural process flow from a risk perspective to a compliance narrative through internal controls into issues and ultimately incident management. So if I go to the NERC inherent risk assessment next, we see a couple of the same slides that we had, or the same reports we had on the previous dashboard, but we've also added a couple new ones. So part of the process for evaluating the risk level of in your NERC requirement is to perform an inherent risk assessment. Here we have an automated process where risk assessments are kicked out on a predetermined basis as defined by the organization, typically around once a year. And each requirement is then assigned a due date to have that assessment completed. All those can be tracked easily from the Open NERC Inherent Risk Assessments dashboard, as well as any past due ones will display over here so I can quickly follow up with users who have not completed their risk assessment. I go to my Rsaw Oversight dashboard. I have a view of all Open NERC Rsaws, which would be kind of your compliance narrative that you perform on an annual basis. I can also see the overall status via a nice pie chart here of how many are in process, how many are completed, awaiting review, or that have been rejected back to the user. Additionally, if I look at this past due NERC compliance narratives, I can notice that I have one compliance narrative that has been completed, that's past due, and it does not have a requirement owner, which may be the reason why it's not completed. By just clicking this little update button, I can then identify a user be assigned, and now I will receive an email as the person that's been assigned that requirement owner to go in and complete that NERC narrative. As I move on to the more advanced monitoring of programs using the controls program, I have a full dashboard of all NERC controls and their related standards and any testing that is being performed. Across the top, I can quickly add new controls, create design tests, operating tests, or add a finding. This first report allows us to monitor the status of all of our controls, whether they're awaiting an evaluation, if they're effective, ineffective, or mitigation in process. On the right, I can quickly monitor all of my NERC standards and determine whether they have effective controls, ineffective controls, mitigations in process, or there's no controls that are to be evaluated. If I want to know more about any one of these, I can always drill into it and determine which requirement has the ineffective controls and what's the status of the related requirements. When we talk about breaking down silos and monitoring compliance across different areas, we also have the ability to monitor our controls by business area. So here we have one that's owned by transmission, that has one that's awaiting design evaluation, one control that's effective, and one control that's ineffective. And I can always click into the report itself, and it'll pull up the ineffective control. NERC controls by owner and compliance status, again, gives you another way to view your data, determine who owns the majority of controls, are we overloading someone, is there a need to break things up further. As I continue down the path, I have NERC processes, risk control evaluations. Through the Onspring platform, you can document your processes. So here we have business continuity and resilience. We can relate it to specific risk statements if you're participating in like an enterprise risk or integrated risk management model. And if I open it up further, I can see all the related controls underneath that risk. Finally, as we move down to the bottom of the dashboard, we have a view into all of the open tests, the validations, the design tests, and any operating tests that are occurring. From the issues monitoring perspective, these would be things that have been found through an audit, through a control test, through an external audit, or by a regional entity, can be documented by creating a new finding. Here we have 3 findings that are currently active for NERC, 1 in draft mode and 2 that are currently being mitigated. I can see the title of the finding, who owns the finding, the related requirements, and this also ties back to that first slide where you can see Val 002-3R1 showed up as a NERC requirement that had on the red flags report. The severity of the finding, some detailed information in the overall status, and if it's related to any controls. If I go down to the mitigation plans, I can track all mitigation activity and whether it's associated with a finding that has been reported to a regional entity, as well as the current due date and if it's on time or past due. In this case, we have one by Becca that's overdue, and it's fairly overdue, so it's someone I may want to follow up with. However, she is also getting email reminders saying you're past due, time to come in and update your mitigation plan or complete it. The final dashboard, and we won't spend a lot of time on it today, but is the ability to document incidents. These are actual events that have occurred inside your network or that impact NERC. Here we have 3 different incidents. We've documented which requirements they're applicable to, the submission date, days open, the type, the location, who's investigating it, and the overall status of it. And if I scroll down, we have a few additional reports and dashboards to identify who's reviewing it, the type per year, and additionally the days open and months that they occurred. If there's any external investigations occurring with those incidents, they also show up on the bottom report here. So if I click into one of these NERC requirements, we can see I've now been taken directly to that requirement page where I have the requirement description, the measure, the applicability, who owns it, any risk assessments that have been performed, RSARs that are in process, related controls, findings, or incidents. It does give us a central location to view all of our data for a single standard in a single spot. So if I click into VAR 004-2, we can see here that we have a roll-up at the standard level, all the requirements underneath it that I can identify the statement and who owns each one. And if I drill into any of them, it'll provide me additional information around risk assessments that have been completed, RSAW statuses, findings, and incidents. Next, I want to go and demonstrate the ability to complete a NERC inherent risk assessment. So I'm going to go to my inherent risk assessment page, and I have one that's past due that's been assigned to me. So users are emailed whenever they have a risk assessment. It will show up on their dashboard that they have an activity to complete. In this case, I have an inherent risk assessment. I've been listed as the evaluator. It has a due date, and I can see the associated requirement and the description associated with that NERC requirement. We have a fairly simple approach to inherent risk assessments currently documented inside the Onspring solution. However, this is a location that we oftentimes see organizations adopting a more complex approach to managing to performing risk assessments, and that can always be enabled and easily integrated into the broader NERC solution. So I'm going to mark this one as probable and the impact as moderate, and then I can provide any likelihood notes. Typically, you're going to find notes to be a little more detailed. And then once I complete it, I can click Save and Close. And the record is removed from the past due, as well as if I go back to COM 001-, we just did R2. There it is. We can see that I just completed this one. Additionally, we did one last year with an inherent risk score of 9. And in the current year, we have moved up. So we can see our inherent risk rating is actually trending northward. You can also run a report then to give me all of the ones that are trending up or down, or pull different reports that provide some additional detail around the trending risk assessments. Since I have completed it, the next risk assessment has automatically been generated for 1 year from today, of August 20th, 2020, and it will continue to do that on an annual basis. Now I'm going to move on to controls and control tests inside the NERC solution. Let's refresh the browser real quick, clicking a little too fast. My internet might be slow on me. Sorry, I just lost my internet access at the location I'm at, so it might be just a moment as we log back in. But Megan, at this point, has any questions come in as I get re-signed in here?
We did have one question come in. What technical capabilities do your clients think are most essential to managing their NERC compliance program? Like, what of the things that you're showing are most essential?
Yep. So it's a great question. And NERC compliance requires a lot of different subject matter expertise. So from a ability to document meaningful compliance narratives, understand the processes themselves, you're really going to need to reach out to the individuals that run those programs. However, from a managing the overall program, a background in particularly audit compliance comes in very handy. From the ability to understand how to document controls, perform control tests, and kind of oversee the entire program. It can really be varied from what an individual background is and what those technical skills are. Through the Onspring platform, we've tried to make it as easy as possible for organizations to adopt the platform immediately and to step into it. And if they don't have a whole lot of changes, to use the portions of the program that they're ready to use. So if you're only at a spot that you just want to document your annual compliance narratives, you can do that, and you can grow into your risk evaluations, your control evaluations, your documented findings, and incident management. It enables organizations to choose the best path for them.
Yeah, and Andrew, I'll just add to that. From a platform and an Onspring perspective, we find that the barrier to learning how to navigate the platform is extremely low, and even the barrier to learn how to become someone who's adept at performing some of those key administrative activities, whether it's building out new forms or making formula changes or introducing new data elements into the program, is also relatively low. I would say that the best sort of kind of mindset and skill set to have is just having sort of that interest in kind of tinkering within a system. And the good news is that we can supplement that with all sorts of training resources and options that'll really help you learn how to navigate both the end user and the administrative side of the platform. So if you're concerned about it from a technical perspective of how do I get this program up and running, what does it take to manage this program, I think, Andrew, you would agree that a lot of it is just in the initial kind of setup and build, which obviously you guys at Central have done a lot of that for the NERC solution. But once you get to that point where the solution is operating, as you would expect it or intend it to, the amount of sort of maintenance that goes into that is extremely minimal.
Andrew, we had another question come in. How are new and revised NERC standards updated inside the solution, or inside the platform?
Yep, great question. So we are constantly monitoring for new and updated revised standards and provide updates to all of our clients that they can upload into the solution. We're also looking to automate some of those uploads here in future releases so that the standards automatically roll to the solution. On our roadmap for continued development is actually a regulatory or NERC standard change management process that as they come in, organizations are notified and they can go through and monitor it. But until then, right now, we just provide updates roughly about once a month. And,
Great.
And my apologies, Megan. It's still kind of spinning here for some reason.
Okay. Here's another question. Can you link findings and assessments and those kinds of things to files inside of a controlled business network?
Yeah, so let me take a shot at starting to answer this. So because, in terms of making linkages between records or data or information that's stored within Onspring versus those in another network, the general answer is Onspring does have an open API capability where data elements can easily be shared between Onspring and other systems, whether those systems are native inside of your network or other cloud-based systems. Obviously, it would come into as you configure the API, the integration. It's just a matter of making sure that the proper credentials are provided. But at least on the Onspring end, we've intentionally kept things very open on our end to really facilitate the sharing of data bidirectionally into and out of the platform. So if you have assets or information or other details that are relevant to your NERC compliance program, and you want that data to be pulled into Onspring, that certainly is a capability. Or if you need the results or the outputs of this process to be delivered to another internal system or or program, that's also capable, certainly on the Onspring side.
All right. One other question, Andrew. Somebody wanted to know your opinion on if you're new to NERC, what's the best way to get started in self-education? Where is the best place to find information?
Yep, great question. I would actually recommend starting with the NERC's website for just getting a good overview of the NERC program, all of the different guidance documents they put out. It is a wealth of information for individuals that are getting new to the program. From there, as you're trying to understand your program better, talk to the subject matter experts in the business to better understand what do they do to maintain compliance with NERC. Oftentimes there's something in place, whether it's monitored centrally or not, that each part of the organization will manage.
Okay. Great.
And I'm just about back up. I apologize.
Okay, well here's one more question for you then, as we're waiting just a couple more in a minute. I think this will lead into hopefully the rest of the demo. How does this help with documentation? NERC is based on evidence of compliance.
Yeah, so let me give an Onspring general overview here. So Onspring as a platform, there's a number of different field types that can be configured into any one of these tables that Andrew's been showing us, including attachment field types. So just generally speaking, attachments of any type or information or evidence of any type can easily be uploaded as evidence of the test work performed. Just like I was talking about before in terms of that native API capability, that evidence could then be ported or transferred into other systems if that's a requirement. And there's any variety of ways that you can provide additional kind of oversight or additional tagging of those data elements or those files that you're uploading. But yeah, you certainly have the ability to upload and maintain evidence of the compliance work that you're performing. And the other really cool thing that we're working on from an Onspring perspective is direct integrations with Office 365 and Google Drive and those sorts of programs, where if those documents or that information needs to live natively on one of those programs, you'll have a direct kind of linkage between the supporting evidence and the associated Onspring, let's say control testing record. Yep, SharePoint as well.
All right, Andrew, do you want to take it back now, and we will resume our questions here after you're done with the demo section?
Thank you, Megan, and appreciate everyone bearing with us during that small technical difficulty. So I've launched an operating test for one of our controls inside here. This would be for when you actually have a higher risk standard or NERC requirement and are going to perform controls around it. Inside the control test itself, I have the ability to document the population of my test, if there's any failures, any comments associated with the failed test, the scope, testing procedures, which can automatically be generated from the control itself, and in the conclusion, from the ability to actually drop in testing evidence, whether you're connecting it to an external site or just want to drop it in, you can always just drag it and drop control tests directly into there. So anytime I go back to that control test, I have that history of those controls. From there, we have a built-in workflow to submit and approve all control tests. And by clicking Save Record, results is required field. I missed one of the fields here, and it tells me exactly where with the red dot. I'm going to mark this as ineffective. and I can save that record. If I want to create a finding and associate with that, it simply is just clicking create a new finding, and the findings record will pop up. It can also be automated, so anytime you have an ineffective control, that will pop up, and you can type in a title of the control. Provide some detailed finding information around what was found, the severity, classification, identify an owner of it. I'm just going to put myself. And then if you want to associate it to a specific NERC requirement, you can do that and it will tie it back to that finding. And that's again how we start to map everything to the NERC requirement itself. And here we can see we have it mapped to related control, the operating test, and if we have a few other options depending upon how far you want to take your individual program. From there, we have a built-in workflow of submitting and approving each individual finding. Typically, this is going to be done by individual people, and you couldn't do it all yourself, but from there, it would actually move into mitigating and creating mitigation plans. Due to the issue of my computer dropping off for a few minutes, I'm going to jump away from findings for the time being. I'm going to move into completing an Rsaw. So we have built a custom solution inside the NERC platform to enable organizations to come in and document all their compliance narratives on an annual basis. And we do this through what we call compliance narratives. So you can see here, I have opened up one of the compliance narratives that have been assigned to me. When I click Edit Record, I'm able to go and edit the individual record. I have the compliance narrative ID, the year, the due date, and then it provides me with a quick overview of the compliance narrative itself, including the requirement, the description, the measure, and the evidence requested, which is pulled directly from the Rsaw. So in addition to keeping an up-to-date library of requirements and standards inside the NERC solution, we're also keeping in the evidence requested, as well as any questions that are asked inside the Rsaw by NERC. One other feature that we've enabled inside the solution is the ability to automatically take last year's answers from the year prior's compliance narratives and populate it into the current year. So here we have our answer narrative that we put in from last year, as well as if I scroll down, we have our compliance narrative, which I can now go in and say for 2019, I need to make some additional updates. Everything has been completed. I can also add in any evidence that you can see has already been added in, but if I want to add another piece, I can just add quick add, provide a title. Give them a revision, document date, relevant pages or section, and provide a general description which matches what's found on the Rsaw documents requested by NERC. Again, I can just take my information, drop it in, click save, and it's now been added. When I have completed, I can just click submit. It'll be sent over to the standard owner, which everything in here is access role controlled. So a NERC requirement owner cannot then also go and approve their own work. It would go to the standard owner to approve it. And once they have approved it, I'm going to click save record here. I go back to the NERC requirement itself. I can see one, I have my history of all the NERC requirements I've completed. And if I go to my NERC standard and click on Rsaw, I just finished my Rsaw today at 12:54 p.m. If I click into the document, it will generate a full Rsaw based upon all compliance narratives that have been completed. So the subject matter expert, the registered entity responses, the answers that I put in there. And here we also have our compliance narrative that we just drafted, including updates for today's demo, evidence requested. There's the evidence that we put into it. And then one I did earlier today with the R2, we can see the compliance narrative being provided there also. Now, these documents are not ready just to be sent directly to NERC for actual Rsaws, but any time that you have an Rsaw request come in from your regional entity, you can always pull this document up, run this process and get all your responses, and then take the responses and putting it into the official form. I go back to the home dashboard. We look at our Rsaw Oversight. We can now see that another one's been completed and our overall chart has changed. So we're getting constant, up-to-date, real-time data as Rsaws are being completed, as compliance narratives are being documented. It continues to update accordingly. So I'm going to pause there. Megan, have we received any other questions in the final minutes today?
Okay. Yeah, there was one other one that came in that says, how do you address security to ensure that entities maintain their required level of compliance with the BES cyber system information if it's uploaded to the system? Yep,
great question. So, Jason, I'm going to need you to talk about the overall security system and where things are uploaded and how that's maintained from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, we maintain ownership of all hardware where any information put into Onspring is uploaded and stored. All of those data centers, our primary and our backup data center, are maintained in the United States here in the Overland Park, Kansas area. All data in our data centers is encrypted at rest and in motion, and we have a number of different security controls in place, including the SOC 2 Type 2 with our data center provider is SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We also have aligned ourselves with the Cloud Security Alliance set of controls, and at any point, if anyone's interested, we have a very detailed control sheet that gives more information on encryption technology, the setup and the maintenance of the different databases, and how we protect data within our network and as it's transitioning in and out of our hardware.
All right.
And I would also add, sometimes what I've seen with other organizations is they're actually, for any very secure documents they do not want to have attached, is provide a link to that document that is restricted on their internal servers at the organization. So that can also be an option that I see implemented quite frequently.
Absolutely.
All right. We are just at the hour mark, so I think that's all we'll have time for today. A big thank you to Andrew for your expertise in this, and for Jason for joining us as well. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up with you via email. There may have been just a couple more that came in that we didn't answer. If you have any additional questions or would like to see a live demo of the NERC solution in Onspring, please request your own demo at onspring.com. Have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.